time to go crazy Pokemon conspiracy mode, because I feel like most of these 7th generation Pokemon were introduced as underpowered for a reason, and that might have something to do with features in Pokemon Sun and Moon. So if you like my craziness, don't forget to leave a like on the video, because that's how YouTube is these days. But let's keep going deeper into this one. So let's do a quick little experiment. Think about the strongest Pokemon in the 7th generation, like those Pokemon that are so overwhelmingly powerful that you know they're going to be around for many generations and they might never lose relevance in the meta. Well, I can really just think of 2 of the legendaries, Tapu Koko and Tapu Lele. We have Mimikyu and Toxapex, and I'm not saying any of the other Pokemon aren't strong, but they're just not as strong. But you can think about other Pokemon, other generations, like, yeah, those things are overwhelming, and they are going to stay on top for a while. Now, true, there are Ultra Beasts, and that just kind of adds another weird wrinkle to this, because almost all of the Ultra Beasts are pretty powerful or scary in their own way. Now, I know that, like, Guzzlord is not really the most terrifying thing, and then Nalego is a nice little sweeper that can set Stealth Rocks. We look at Pokemon like Pheromosa, Kartana, Buzzwole, Circuitry. These things bring a new level of power that we've never seen before, and yeah, I can understand that that was one of the intentions of Ultra Beasts, but then when you balance out against the rest of the generation, there's not really much going on. So outside of Legendaries and then Ultra Beasts, it doesn't seem like the 7th generation had a lot of powerful Pokemon, and you could just go through the list, that there's not a lot of Pokemon introduced in the 7th generation. We already know it, we've already talked about it. That's why I scrolled through in the beginning, because, hey, that's most of the 7th generation Pokemon, and you can think about them, like, that's weird, it's condensed, and a lot of the 7th generation Pokemon have their own personality. It's hard to forget any of the new Pokemon, but the problem is you just don't get to use them that often. Still waiting on the hidden abilities for these starters, but then when you think about Salazzle, seems like it should have been a much stronger Pokemon that could have gotten a lot more use. It's still solid, but it's not like the most insane thing ever. And then Silvally, Kamala, Sarina, these Pokemon seem like they're missing just a little bit. You know, they're slightly underwhelming compared to where they need to be, and they're not as strong as they should be. And even some of the other Pokemon that are already fairly strong, it feels like even the strong Pokemon are just slightly under or missing out on a couple of stats or movesets or changes that really didn't make an impact in the 7th generation. Like, Kamala could be tankier if you want to stay around and then do a lot of damage with its ability. Silvally, 95 across the board is just not enough. I mean, we have Pokemon like the Wishiwashi, which have over 600 base stat total. Silvally could have been closer to a pseudo-legendary, if not stronger, because it's meant to be like an Arceus level Pokemon. And then I think we can kind of tie all of this in with Sarina. That for pretty much all of these 7th generation Pokemon that aren't insanely powerful, they have one thing that makes them stand out. They have like one super overpowered part of their kit, but then the rest of it doesn't really fall through. Kamala's ability, absolutely nuts. So the abilities of some of the Pokemon are really ridiculous. And then we have Sarina, Trop Kick, just lowers the opponent's attack for free. But it doesn't really have any kind of like sweeping stats where you can just like lock down and shut down Pokemon consistently. We have Ribombee. Ribombee's fast now as Quiver Dance, but doesn't have a lot to kind of follow up with that speed and the Quiver Dance. And also, if you're already having a high speed Pokemon, then the Quiver Dance speed boost is kind of wasted, even though that is one of the best moves. But I think Shiinotic kind of embodies this as well. I would consider Strength Sap one of, if not the strongest move ever introduced in Pokemon, because you lower the opponent's attack. There are moves that only just lower the opponent's attack, and then you heal. And for the most part, you're going to be healing more than half your health. So it's already a stronger than average healing move that has the effect of reducing a stat, which is all that some moves even get. So Strength Sap is pretty ridiculous, but then you look at Shiinotic, the typing. Yeah, some Pokemon also have a good typing, and then other Pokemon have a bad typing, but Shiinotic's typing just does not work out. You have way too many weaknesses with the Grass typing, and then you add Fairy onto it just to get even more weaknesses. And the hit point stat is also really low. Like, this Pokemon is not as tanky as a Amoonguss without as good of an ability, but it gets Strength Sap and Spore. So there's a lot of potential there for this thing to be absolutely disgusting. Yet it just didn't happen. Also, we can always look at the, just the Nerf till the Haxie kind of moves. You know, Confusion getting cut from 1/2 to 1/3. Swagger, Thunder Wave, all of those moves getting little bits of nerfs as well. And, like, you just can't really excel as much as you could in previous generations, and then you look at just the Pokemon introduced, and there's something missing. Now, one thing tricky about Game Freak in this situation is that they've been really pushing for doubles the last couple of generations. I think the 7th generation showed most balance put towards the double battle side of things, like the Pokemon introduced, the abilities introduced as well as just the other tuning moves and stats and everything we've seen. Like, all of the legendary Pokemon like Tapu Koko and just the whole Tapu forms, that's terrain. Terrain affects everything on the field for several turns, so it leads to combos. Oranguru was introduced with a move that only works in double battles with that instruct. Like, technically you can instruct your opponent, but that's not going to be effective right there. We have Power of Alchemy. We have Receiver as an ability. We have Mimikyu even with Disguise, because you can disguise Focus Sash, and now you're surviving that first turn pretty much no matter what. Unless they like get through your ability or use a multi-hit move that does enough to KO you as well. But it just kind of shows there was a lot of balance put towards the double battle side of things. So Game Freak is caring about the competitive scene right now. And even with Tapu Koko is one of the more powerful Pokemon that's been introduced in the 7th generation. However, its moveset is very limited. There are no physical... It didn't get Play Rough. I think that's all you have to do is you look at that. It didn't get Play Rough. It got Dazzling Gleam instead of Moonblast. And its highest attack stat is actually the one that's primarily not going to use. That's a special attacker for the most part, and that's actually the lower offensive stat. And if it wants to use the physical stat, then it's going to be Wild Charge, so it's taking recoil. Has to give up something for those extra stats, and then Tapu Koko turned out to be pretty powerful. I can see where sometimes, like, Game Freak was trying to intentionally make a strong Pokemon. I think Toxapex is a good sign for that, but also, with the Poison typing added on, does have a couple of weaknesses. Tapu Lele, the, like, rise of Psychic-type Pokemon, has also just kind of balanced out a lot of the strengths right there. So it seems like Game Freak wanted to make it to where there was going to be less Pokemon that just came in as incredibly powerful, except for maybe Ultra Beasts. So it looks like Game Freak only intentionally made the Legendaries and Ultra Beasts the strong Pokemon, and then everything else is slightly underwhelming. Now, they might have done this out of fear because whenever you look at any competitive game, I think League of Legends is a great example, because you can tell that they've been fairly timid with balance patches, or at least introducing new champions to a degree. Ever since, like, Darius and Diana just, like, wrecked everything back in the earlier seasons of League of Legends, you can see that some champions would be introduced intentionally weak, and then they'd still become some of the strongest champions ever released because of just either the skill cap. And then you look at Pokemon, we have several hundred Pokemon interacting with several hundred other Pokemon, especially in doubles. We have an almost infinite potential when it comes to mixing around with the movesets, the abilities, the items, having the EVs also balance out the natures. So all those characteristics of a Pokemon make it really hard to determine what is going to make it turn out to be really good. Sometimes a Pokemon just appears out of nowhere and turns out to be really strong just because that combo was finally discovered. That little bit of extra optimization in its moveset was finally unlocked. It looks like Game Freak would give pretty much all of the Pokemon something that would make it really good, but then kneecapped everything else and said, there we go. That's how we do balance in Pokemon now, and it turned out to where everything was a little underwhelming. Now, it could be because Game Freak did that since they didn't want the metagame to get stale, but unfortunately, the way that the Pokemon community has kind of gone downhill over the last couple of years, it's always going to get stale, unfortunately. And then, like, I think it's also part of, like, Game Freak's balance, because there's nothing wacky anymore. There's nothing wild that can really just kind of not be dominating, but at least compete with the metagame. There's no anti-meta anymore, because the way that Game Freak has done balance is really just kind of enforced meta stuff, and then the game gets pretty boring from there. So it looks like instead of doing, like, high amounts of power, Game Freak has reduced that power level, and the game has gotten a bit more boring. So, I mean, and I think we can see that in what happened with these Pokemon on the 7th generation. So now, how does this tie into Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon? Well, my crazy conspiracy is that even when looking at all of that, maybe Game Freak was going for balance, but I'm also wondering if maybe they were building up into a new feature for the 7th generation, like Z-Crystals. That already seems like something that should have been meta-shattering and making, you know, weaker Pokemon stronger, but whenever you give something that's just a flat boost to all Pokemon, the strong Pokemon are going to be stronger, and then the weak Pokemon, they're going to get stronger, but they stay weak by comparison. Now, there are a few outliers that can take a Z-move and do more with it than other Pokemon, and they've kind of risen up. But for the most part, yeah, it's like, okay, you just gave like a flat buff to everything kind of once per battle, and you have to be strategic about it. So I feel like there's still more potential to do like something crazy with Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and maybe that's why we didn't, like, maybe Game Freak did that, you know, they threw out these Pokemon with the crazy abilities, just in case someone went up and started, like, making some of these Pokemon the most broken things ever, but maybe there could also be some buffs coming in as well. So maybe the idea is that, okay, if the Pokemon is missing stats, they're going to give it stats. If the Pokemon was missing moveset stuff, they're going to give it moveset stuff, and we also have tutors. We don't know what the move tutors are going to be in the 7th generation, and maybe this is going to hint at, like, you know, 3rd generation move tutors, you know, almost every Pokemon getting access to the Mimic, getting access to those early moves or early TMs and just kind of going crazy with it. Also, just the existing move tutors, you know, a couple Pokemon getting Drain Punch could get pretty crazy. Power Punch is going to most likely make a return as one of those, like, phased out TMs that then comes back as a move tutor. We're going to see all the 7th generation Pokemon that didn't have access to, like, Elemental Punches, Knock Off, Drain Punch, Pain Split, all these other moves have potential access for these moves as well. So maybe that's another plan for the buff. I think Solgaleo, I already did a video on, like, you know, the most crazy potential move tutors in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Seems like there's a lot of Pokemon that could get quite a benefit from it, but also if they just introduce more move tutors, introduce new moves, introduce new moveset changes, that could be enough to kind of change the Pokemon around, and then maybe just kind of add that balance. Okay, Game Freak played it safe, now it's time to crank it up and get the craziness going. But also, maybe there's Ultra Forms. Maybe there's going to be a new kind of mechanic that is maybe only exclusive for 7th generation Pokemon. Like, if you're in the Alola region, you're kind of hit by this potential Ultra Wormhole kind of power, this Ultra Dimensional stuff that kind of resides throughout the region. So maybe 7th generation Pokemon, they might all get an exclusive form, or all kind of, like, get some exclusive power that can be used as a part of that Alola region stuff. Now, this is mostly just going off of Solgaleo and Lunala. We see that they have something to do with Necrozma, it looks like some kind of Prism Armor, but what if this is just like something like a mini Mega Evolution, that when a Pokemon has this armor on it, whenever this Pokemon is touched by the Ultra Dimension, or whatever this could be, that could be a flat buff to those Pokemon, maybe it just gets like 10 across the board. Now that could be really stupid for some Pokemon, and we can already see Solgaleo and Lunala have it, so Tapu Koko or Ultra Beast getting further modified, that's going to be bad, but I'm also thinking maybe it could be a more personalized stat boost as well, kind of like with Mega Evolution, that maybe the roster for the 7th generation was small because you can kind of keep this balance going, that you're not giving like 50 Mega Evolutions to all the Pokemon that were introduced in that generation, but if you can just kind of tune up some of the fully evolved forms, there's not as many if you don't introduce as many Pokemon to begin with, so it might just be like, hey, they all gain a plus 50 in some kind of way that could improve the way that they play. And you can only do it once per battle or something, or you only get it for a limited amount of time. That's why I'm still holding to my Ultra Lycanroc theory. I know that people are going to say, ha ha ha, you were wrong, you're an idiot, once it's proven that it, like, once we get the game mechanics, once Pokemon Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon comes out, and turns out that this was like a totem encounter, that's always a possibility. But there's nothing confirming a totem encounter, so there's no way to be proven right at this point. That's why it's called speculation. That's why it's called theory. I want to see the cool thing. I want to see Game Freak break the standard mold. You know, it's like, oh, that's an encounter for totem, and that means we still have totem battles. That's not exciting for Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. But all of the Pokemon in the 7th generation, or some of the weaker Pokemon introduced, those Pokemon getting like a totem form that you can use in battle, or an Ultra form that's usable in battle, that's one of the craziest things ever, and it could make sense, because when we look at the way the Pokemon were introduced, we look at the way the metagame is being balanced, we look at what's going on with Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon just off of Solgaleo and Lunala, it seems like there could be this potential for some kind of power through the Alola region to affect all of these 7th generation Pokemon, and then that would bring balance to the game. It would make things much more dynamic, and it would also just add a layer of craziness to these Pokemon that seemed a little weaker for no reason. So maybe there's an extra bit of power, maybe it's just going to be a bigger Z Crystal buff. Who even knows? We already know that the Z bracelet looks different. We can twist it, and then there's like a power that emanates from the Z bracelet. What if every Pokemon in the 7th generation gets a fusion form because of the Alola region, that it can interact with other Ultra Beasts and get that kind of form? Like, looking at Lycanroc, Lycanroc seems like one of the greatest contenders to actually get some stats and be useful. Because Lycanroc's Midday form has Accelerock, which is pretty cool, but turned out to not really be that useful. And then we have Lycanroc Midnight form, which is kind of one of the main Pokemon that the Pokemon Company has been promoting throughout the Pokemon Sun and Moon. Just the release and all the news, because it's a badass Pokemon. but at the end of the day, we didn't really get to do anything with it. So yeah, there's a lot of really awesome Pokemon introduced, a lot of really awesome new abilities, new moves, new potential for just crazy powerful Pokemon, but it fell flat. So I'm thinking there has to be something else there. There has to be something new, there has to be something crazy, and that's kind of my theory and my crackpot theory today that I said I was going to do. You know, we're going to go deep today, we're going to go crazy, but hey, what if the Pokemon were intentionally weak for some of the features in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon? Maybe that is Totem, Lycan, Rock, but maybe it's also that we just haven't seen the new feature yet in the trailers, but it still could be out there, still could be the next news update or something like that. So I'm always hopeful for some shenanigans. It's Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, we have Ultra Beast, we have Ultra Forms, we have this story about Necrozma who looks like an Ultra Beast. It's all over the place, guys. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video, hope you guys enjoyed my sanity, and I'll see you in the insanity. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching.